2, 1, sear.
Smoking Joe, Mikey Burns, Hey Stack, Mr. Chimney, MIC, free up the herb, on that drove, that lean, that sticky, get green, I'm on that drove, that lean, that dish, that's how it is. Hey girl, what you like? I can roll them switches.
Get ready.
It was a violent, frightening world in which the doctors tried to manage and control schizophrenics as best they could. Lang had noticed that the psychiatrists hardly ever spoke to the schizophrenics. So as an experiment, he took 12 women and spent months talking to them about themselves and their lives. The results were dramatic. After just a few months, all 12 were well enough to leave the hospital. Within a year, Lang discovered that all of them had returned to the hospital. His attempt at a cure had failed completely.
After this experiment, these women left hospital, and after another year they were all back again. No one knew why they'd come in the first place, and no one knew why they had to come back again. So that shifted my focus of attention and interest and research interest out into the actual circumstances where this thing called madness is incubated.
Lang began to investigate the families of the schizophrenics. His research led him into a hidden, closed world where he studied how the members of the families behaved towards each other in private. And he became convinced that the roots of this madness lay concealed in this unexamined world. The doctors and nurses who used chemicals and ECT to try and return the patients to their families were making a terrible mistake. They were sending them back to the private horror that had first created the madness. If this were true, then the doctors, although they believed that they were doing their public duty and what was best for the patient, were in reality violent agents of oppression.
We're here for your fucking freedom!
You can't cheat at bingo. You can't cheat at bingo. If you could, I would. You can't cheat at bingo.
The computer would then decide whether people were normal or abnormal. Psychiatry, Lannister, was a fake science, used as a system of political control to shore up a violent collapse in society. Its categories of madness and sanity had no reality. Madness was simply a convenient label used to lock away those who wanted to break free. This new system of psychological disorders had been created by an attack on the arrogance and power of the psychiatric elite in the name of freedom. But what was beginning to emerge from this was a new form of control. The disorders and checklists were becoming a powerful and objective guide to what were the correct and appropriate feelings in an age of individualism and emotion. But this was a very different system of order. No longer were people told how to behave by an elite. Instead, they now used the checklists to monitor their feelings and police their own behavior. The first time that anyone had gone out and asked ordinary people how they thought and felt. And the results, when processed by the computers, were astonishing. More than 50% of Americans suffered from some type of mental disorder.
These studies revealed very high rates of mental disorder. There are very high disorders out there. Half the population has a mental disorder.
Whether they exist in any particular way, or they exist in the same way, or if they are the same kinds of things, didn't matter. This is just what they look like.
To develop techniques to read the inner desires of individuals and then fulfill them with products.
You know, how this bar of soap with a bag of flour will make you a happier, more successful, more sexually appealing, less fearful person.
Trying to understand how people feel about brands, how they relate to brands, that is to say, what the brand's personality is.
And that the role of a marketer, the role of somebody selling something, including a politician, is to appeal to the players from two different views of unconscious desire. You have the view that people are irrational, that they are bundles of unconscious emotion. That comes directly out of Freud. And businesses are very able to respond to that. That's what they have honed their skills to. That's what marketing is really all about. What are the symbols, the music, the images, the words that will appeal to these unconscious feelings? Politics must be more than that. Politics and leadership are about engaging the public in a rational discussion and deliberation about what is best, and treating people with respect in terms of their rational ability to debate what is best. If it's not best, if it is fraudulent, if it is basically a matter of appealing to the same basic unconscious feelings, the business appeals to, then why not let business do it? Business can do it better. Business knows how to do it. Business, after all, is in the business. Business, after all, is in the business.
Tell you how to get
What we have to do is a very narrow, peculiar idea. It was born out of paranoia of that time. It is based on an image of human beings as selfish, isolated, and suspicious creatures who constantly monitor and strategize against each other. The films will show how politicians and scientists came to believe that this idea of human nature could be the basis of a new type of free society. But what none of them would realize was that within this dark and distrustful vision lay the seeds of a new and revolutionary system of social control. It would use the language of freedom, but in reality it would come to entrap us and our leaders in a narrow and empty world.
Tomorrow is ours.
The computer would then decide whether people were normal or abnormal.
It's like a and a bloody war killing children and disemboweling people cut out without it.
All human judgment would be removed. In reality, we, like the politicians, have become the slaves of our own desires. We have forgotten that we can be more than that there are other sides to human nature.
But the thing about it is that the system that we've created, which is malignant, you'd have to call it malignant when you look at it in total perspective. Here we are, 6% of the world. We use 36% of its resources. I count water and air, by the way. You know, most of those counts don't do that. And so, but everybody is a willing prisoner, and that's why I say it's a Stockholm syndrome of the soul. They're willing prisoners. They identify with their captors. Capitalism is an extractive process. It's a faceless machine that exists for one reason, to extract from you production and profit.
That's another difference between the Soviet Union and the United States that turned out to be to the advantage of the Soviet Union, which is American propaganda is very good. There's all this advertising, all this marketing, seducing people and doing things that are bad for them. And Soviet propaganda was heavy-handed, it was kind of ugly, and it was not seducing people. It was trying to basically harangue and browbeat people into doing things that were good for them. Now it turns out that human nature is such that people won't respond very well to that treatment. Humans like to be seduced. They like to be, cajoled, and they like to do things that are bad for them if somebody tells them that that's okay. So, in terms of that, Soviet propaganda pretty much made people kind of think for themselves a little bit, and American propaganda kills that, so you have very few people in this country, there's all this talk about individualism, but really it's very much a, herd mentality kind of country. Where everybody thinks that, it's okay to have credit cards. It's okay to, max out your credit. It's fine. That's what everybody's doing. And the thing is, I've seen a lot of just really horrendous suffering, and so I can't really be sort of lighthearted about it. Oh, capitalism is going to fall apart. People are not going to be exploited anymore. How wonderful. The fact is that, it's going to be really painful to watch. And that's the part that I don't like about it.
The very people who were telling the traditional Poles they would vote Labour were in reality preparing to vote Conservative out of self-interest. But they were too embarrassed to admit it.
The thing Ronald Reagan did was to make the denial of compassion respectable. He said, you've worked hard, you've made your money. You shouldn't have to feel guilty about refusing to throw it away on people who choose to be homeless.
The people are not in charge. The people exercise no decision-making power within this environment. So democracy is reduced from something which assumes an active citizenry to something which now increasingly is predicated on the idea of the public as passive consumers, the public as people who essentially what you're delivering them are doggy treats.
Personally think that that it was one of the greatest threats to the system. I mean, my God, the Republicans spent, what was it, $30 million to things like the Heritage Foundation, erasing the 60s. It was a terrible threat, you know, because here you had this generation, this baby boom post-war generation that was best fed, best educated, had every reason to be optimistic. I mean, we really believed we were going to win. We had, now people are told today that we were naive and it was all just bell-bottoms, hot smoke, and beef. Well, that's just not enough. There was a core of very dedicated people who essentially, you have to call it spiritual. But anyway, that generation was very well equipped. And for the tide of optimism, it wasn't all the war in Vietnam. The war in Vietnam was like the war now. Was like the war now. But it wasn't the catalyst. Everybody wasn't the catalyst. Yeah, there were demonstrations. Yeah. But the main thing going on was that a generation was becoming conscious and in a good way, believing in optimistic, hopeful message of creativity, love, and peace. That it was a direct threat to the military-industrial complex, you know, that was built up particularly during World War II. I had to tie together why the book is about why working class people vote against their own interest, and I didn't want to write a political book. I wanted to write a human book about people I knew and grew up with. But at the end, I had to tie it together in some way. And why would anybody behave this way against their own interest? And so I discussed what I call the American hologram. And it's a self-referential bubble in which the people inside of it, you know, directly wired particularly to television, movies, and media. It's like a snow globe, you know, and a bloody war killing children and disemboweling people and hundreds of thousands of dead is reduced to Alan Boyd and the flag and America and the place of church and freedom and opportunity. And the hologram gives us that message of freedom. Fed practically directly to the brainstem from all of us. Yes, the uniforms. There's really no big evil guy controlling it. We manifested it ourselves.
We're here for your fucking freedom! Stand up right now!
I've never made any bones about it. LSD, along with Buddhism and psychology, but particularly LSD, the other two wouldn't even happen, was the great awakening to me. I was a rural kid living in a small town, and I'd read about it when I was in the 9th grade and wanted some. I'd read about it in Life magazine, this terrifying drug, and hell, I'd never even smoked a cigarette in my life, but I wanted some. Anyway, it finally came along. Johns Hopkins, a friend of mine who was being treated for his homosexuality with LSD. We continued his treatment as long as we could possibly push it, and he would bring it. And it was legal. It was the first 3 years I took it. It was legal. And from the very first time I took it, for once I saw the world, you know, and I saw how malleable reality was. And when it was done, I sat and cried because I knew life could be this good. I knew there was more meaning there. There was more to be felt, live, know, and to be, you know. And so nothing was ever the same after that, because I had applied myself like so many other people, not because it was LSD. Same way with ayahuasca until very recently. I had a big refrigerator full of it. And I haven't taken it in years, but there seems to be a lot of interest in it. Anyway, the expansion of consciousness, you have to call it that. You know, realizing how malleable and that reality is a consensus agreement between people. You know, you could also agree on something else than capitalism and brutal commuting and murdering each other psychologically for jobs. It's possible to agree on something else, and maybe that's why I like the third world in my later years, is that they have agreed on something else.
No longer did we worship at the shrine of no-holds-barred capitalism.
It's out of experience like ours that the new world will be built. I think that what I'm seeing is a race. It's a race between whether we will attain a degree of consciousness on this planet, and it's a race between whether we're going to have a habitable planet or whether we'll attain as life forms on this planet some form of cosmic consciousness in time to carry out, finish out this experiment that was begun many billions of years ago. And I think that what I've been seeing in this last few weeks or months is some warning signs that we're not winning our race, that Gaia is in a lot worse trouble than we thought. And I'm seeing all of this, and it's sad to say it, but it seems to me that history might indeed be ending. And if climate change tips us into a desert world, and it does it in less than 1,000 years, maybe even 100 years, instead of 1 billion years, well, it's our fault, but blame is pretty useless. So what was the end result of the experiment? Some would say that the purpose of the experiment of having life on this planet was to lift off consciousness, to transcend the corporeal realm and to start working consciousness through various dimensions. And for the past many decades, that's what we've been doing. Albert Hoffman discovered LSD about the end of the 1940s. You had Gordon Wasson going down to meet with the curanderos in Mexico in the 50s. You had a lot of people who were beginning this exploration. In fact, those numbers have been expanding every year. And time is now getting very short. And we have to wonder whether we're going to make it to the finish line in time. That's the race I see underway. And who knows how it's going to come out. But I think whoever is engaged in this exploration is doing the heavy lifting for all life on Earth at this point. It's absolutely essential. This exploration is doing the heavy lifting for all life on Earth to Mars or building future. It's absolutely essential. Consciousness much more is doing the heavy lifting than sending rockets to Mars or building future. At the same time, I say that I think the age of science may soon be ending and giving way to an age of art. At the same time, be artists, not scientists. The age of science may soon be ending and giving way to. I think one of the major problems that we face is that we have this. I think one of the major problems is expectations that part of our education, part of our development as individuals when we're young, and it comes from our heritage, which is out of a kind of warlike evolutionary process over the course of many centuries, and we see the need to be somehow striving constantly for achievement in some way or shape or form. And I think that that's one of the big problems that we have as a society. It's why we're having the issues that we're having with climate change, because we are overextended. We're overextended on our resource. Our demands on Gaia have greatly exceeded what Gaia's capabilities are. And I think that we have to change that need. We need to shift. We need to go to a much more less consumptive, but also easygoing society. And I think that probably that's going to happen through education of children more than any other way. Although we need to also think about how do adults change, and what are the ways we change adult thinking. And I think arts are one of the ways that we do that. But I think that also the change may not happen fast enough if we wait generationally to make the shifts that we need to make. One of the major changes that has to happen has to deal with population. We have religious, ethical, and cultural boundaries that we've placed on large families. We say, okay, we should have people, a lot of religions want you to have more kids, prohibit birth control, and so forth. And what we find is we get into the situation now where we are exceeding the carrying capacity of the planet with a sudden explosion in the last few hundred years of the 6.5 billion of us now headed on its way to 9 billion. Pretty hard to stop that. And the question is, how do we bring that down? What's the process by which we bring that population down? And I think as we go through this crisis in the coming years and have to shift to an agricultural economy, in some ways that even gets harder because people will think of they need their kids in order to help them grow food and care for them in old age and that sort of thing, which is traditional farming economy is an economy that tends to have large families.
lot of people have this vision of agriculture as endless misery and drudgery. They think, oh God, I'm going to spend the rest of my life. But it's happening around the world, and seeing gang movies. And one of the things I can say is that it just doesn't have to be that hard. I should be upfront and say I have 4 children, not entirely intentionally, but I have 4 children, and I'm not unhappy about that fact. So there certainly are plenty of people who will say that I am a major contributor to the problem. And honestly, first world children are a much bigger problem than third world children. I mean, I don't actually deny that what I do doesn't meet the requirements of the categorical imperative. That is, everybody can't do what I do and us have a livable world. So I just want to get that out of the way up front because, you know, people know this, and it's appropriate that sort of I acknowledge my own complicity in this. I think the point at which we have to start dealing with population issues is right now. But I don't necessarily believe in dealing with it in some of the sort of stronger ways that get floated around among people who feel very strongly about this. That is, I believe that on some level, we are dealing with population growth right now. Since 1950, the world TFR, that's total fertility rate, has fallen from around 5 children per person to about 2.7, which is just an enormous drop in fertility. There is a fertility transition that happened after death rates began to fall due to modern medicine and vaccines and things in the world, is that for a short period of time, people have a lot more children because they haven't quite adapted to the fact that more of their children are going to survive into adulthood. And then you begin to see a demographic transition, which is what demographers call it, where birth rates begin to fall and people start having fewer children. And all over the world, that's actually happening. Now, it's famously happening in places like Europe and Japan, where total fertility rates are, 1.5 and under. But it's also happening in poor countries. It's happening in Sri Lanka, in Thailand, in Kerala, in India, in much of Eastern Europe. And these are places that tend to be quite poor, but where women have simply managed to get to the point where their children are starting to get to adulthood, and they are making rational choices. That is, they're choosing to have fewer children. What seems to help world TFR is good education for women, reasonable chances of infant survival rates, which is actually something that does require some medical infrastructure, but can be done quite cheaply and doesn't require a lot of medical infrastructure. And the reasonable hope that your kids won't be taken off and killed in some war or something. Essentially, women need to get to have the kids they do have grow up, and they have fewer children. We're in the process of a vast demographic transition. It may not be happening as fast as we like. It may not even be happening fast enough, and that's another issue.
Now you hear people say, and again, these are people who are well-meaning, often well-educated, but don't understand the problem. Say that, American agriculture is the most efficient in the world today. That's nonsense. It's the least efficient in the world today. It's the least efficient because you have to use, as your definition of efficiency, how much energy does it take in the form of petroleum, natural gas, etc., to produce 1 unit of energy that's on your dinner table. And that's about 10 units of petroleum energy for 1 unit of food energy on your table. Now the thing that makes people say we're more efficient is they use a different measure. They say how many person hours on the farm are required to produce 1 unit of food. Well, that number has been going down, leading these people without understanding to say, we're more efficient. We don't use as many people farming as we used to. But that's not a good measure. That's just a measure that we're substituting petroleum for people on the farm.
I admire enormously, one of the great founders of the organization, Thomas Jefferson. I think they got it entirely right in the early 1950s. One of the things that Thomas Jefferson said was, I envisaged America as a country of small farmers. And it was a country of small farmers until well into the 20th century. And now, as I'm sure you know, you have only 1% of people working on the land in your country. In your country, you've got more people in jail than there were people on the land. So if you're really trying to feed people well, provide a maximum amount of food, you finish up, focus on what's arable, sit in the horse doctor in the best places, and then just sit in the animals where you can. If you do that, you finish up with a lot of plants, not much meat, and maximum variety. The whole thing becomes very, very varied if you start doing it in this kind of way, using different classes of livestock, different kinds of crops, carrying one off against another. If you then say, well, take this little slogan, a lot of plants, not much meat, maximum variety. This is what you do if you want to farm well, but it also summarizes the best of the nutritional theory from the last 30 years. In other words, farming that's designed simply to produce lots of good food will also meet human nutritional requirements as well as they can be met. If you now look at all the great cooking in the world, all the great cuisines, and I'm talking about places like India, Turkey, China, southern France, Provence, Italy possibly being the greatest of all, North Africa, and indeed from your own country, Cajun cooking and that kind of thing, you find that all the great cuisines also make use of this fundamental pattern of a lot of plants, not much meat, and maximum variety. And what this means is that good farming, designed to produce lots of good food, is perfect nutritionally and can also support the greatest cuisines that the world has ever produced. And this is why I'm saying that seriously diseases, because actually, if you farm reasonably, according to basic principles, basically you don't have to ask people even to be austere. You don't have to ask them to eat out. You merely have to ask them to take food very, very seriously. In fact, to become gourmet. And the kind of people who are very easy to feed are people like the Italians who really do understand food, and the French who really do understand food. Love the food in very high standards. They're very easy to feed because they like a lot of plants, not much of the variety. So this is the kind of route I want to go down. Now then, the other thing, if you then ask the question, but how do you farm in this beautiful way, lots of plants, how do you do that? The answer is it has to have a very high standard of husbandry, because this kind of farming is very intricate. So you have to have lots and lots of farmers. And if you've got lots and lots of farmers farming intricately, then really you're better off with lots of small farms, family farms, than you are by having very big, very big places, very big stuff. No, you are by having very big places. You're just trying to, produce monoculture.
One of my favorite poems is a Wordsworth poem called The Solitary Reaper. And it's about this woman out with a scythe cutting grain. And she's singing while she's doing it. And, when I read it in graduate school, I don't think it ever registered on me. But if you can sing while you're doing something, it's not that hard. If you ever try and do it, it's not that much work. It's not that farming isn't work. It can be a lot of work, but there are a lot of methodologies that make it anything but, I'm going to spend the rest of my life swinging a mattock at the closet for the rest of the You don't have to do that stuff. A lot of our models of agriculture have been based on cheap oil. That is, it makes a lot of sense to fill up fields with tractors, even though that's really bad for the soil and things if you have all that horsepower. On the other hand, if you have a yard and limited free time, it makes a lot of sense to mulch with your own grass clippings and with the compost that you make on your property and never kill anything at all. Just stir it up a little with a fork and plant some vegetables into it.
The logic of the fossil fuel world has been a logic of great globalization, of great disconnection one from each other because we no longer have a practical need for our neighbors. Hence the logic of a world past cheap fossil fuel, I think, is one where we begin to draw a little closer together again. What we know about human satisfaction would lead us to believe that will have at least as many benefits as costs. And we'll get better at it as we do it. We've lost some of those skills in the last 50 years. We're not that good at cooperating with each other on these things. We're all obsessed with the idea that we should pay less taxes and be left alone and whatever. But in fact, the communities that survive best, the people that survive best in these challenging times, are going to be those who live in communities that are able to adapt and work with each other well.
I do think that the restoration of public space and indeed the restoration of satisfying daily environments in the U.S. Is liable to follow that kind of socially emergent quality that I alluded to earlier. Just as the disaggregation of our towns and cities proceeded from the conditions of the 20th century, namely, this incredible abundance of cheap oil. So things are going to, I think, reorganize and re-self-organize in the other direction as we're forced to downscale. The only real big question is how disorderly this process is likely to be, because unlike a lot of other people who think about these issues, I assume that there will be quite a bit of disorder in the process, and that it won't be a simple segue or transition to the next thing, because we're going to be left with an awful lot of liabilities and frankly, just a big mess to clean up. You know, a lot of the stuff that we've invested in over the last 60 years, the shopping malls and the strip malls and all of the automobile infrastructure and the parking lots, most of this stuff doesn't really lend itself to being retrofitted along the lines that a lot of people fantasize about. For one thing, we're probably going to be a much less affluent society in the coming decades than we were in the previous decades. So we're not going to have the investment resources to put into retrofitting the suburbs and the malls. That's why I maintain a lot of those things will end up as either ruins, slums, or salvage yards. We're probably going to have to return to traditional human environments, namely smaller cities, small towns that have a meaningful relationship with productive agricultural surroundings. And, we do have a lot of small towns and small cities in America that are suitable for this. The fate of our larger cities, I think, is somewhat more tragic, because we're not going to be able to maintain these so-called metroplexes in their current scale. And what happens to them is liable to be extremely messy and disorderly, especially the ones that are overburdened with skyscrapers, although there aren't that many of them, mainly New York and Chicago. There are going to be a lot of forces in motion. I think that the redevelopment that we see in the future is going to be on a much smaller increment and a much finer grain than what we've been used to. We're not going to be doing 40-acre redevelopments. We're going to be doing the single building lot in a town, at a time, because the investment is simply not going to be there to do $50 million projects anymore, or $300 million projects. We're going to have to do it on a much finer scale than that. But as we also move into an era in which the car is a diminishing presence in our lives, we're not going to be designing strictly for cars and for motoring anymore. And I think we're going to naturally return to some of the modes of design that, can be described as traditional. And when we do that, we're going to rediscover that the street is the primary public place that we have in our world, and that we're going to find a way to embellish it and honor it that is consistent with a much healthier existence. So, a lot of the traditional things that we understood how to do in architecture and urban design, which we threw in the garbage in the mid-20th century, are going to return, and indeed they are returning already.
Cheap fossil fuel and the affluence that it provides
have allowed us to become the first people in the world who have no need of our neighbors. We've taken that to be a good thing and talked a lot about independence and, individualism and all of that. But in fact, as the descendants of socially evolved primates who spent all day sitting around grooming each other, it turns out that it's not what we were built for, and it's not what we like. And one of the benefits of getting away from the cheap fossil fuel world we now inhabit will be the inevitable resurgence of more community. We see it happening already. Farmers markets are the fastest growing part of the food economy in this country. And one of the reasons that they're growing fast is because people like the experience of shopping at them. The average shopper at a farmer's market has 10 times as many conversations as the average shopper at a supermarket. That's a lot. That's what we're built for.
But we really have to change. Because if we can't do that in an organized, peaceful way, then nature will take a hand and do it in a way that's not very pleasant.
I know a lot of people who live in neighborhoods and they don't know the people on the other side of them well enough to talk to. But if you depend on other people for help with things that you now have sort of electric servants to do for you, then you have to know your neighbors. You can't get away with that. And that does come with, as Barbara Ehrenreich has pointed out, with some real opportunities for celebration and festivity. Helena Norberg-Hodge talks about the Ladakis who live in high plains areas around Tibet, who said that basically they spend 4 months working really hard to get their food, and the rest of the year they spend partying. They drink beer and socialize and have a really good time. Medieval peasants in Britain in the 11th century used to work only 176 days a year. The rest were Sabbaths and festivals, and there was a hogshead of beer for every 6 peasants for every festival. There's a real culture of celebration and of joy and delight that goes around with strong community structures and local economies and local food. The other thing is I think that there's a chance we can get back some of our political power. A lot of people that I know feel very powerless. They feel like their world is run by interests they don't control, and I think that's absolutely true. But when you reduce the scale of your world, when you take away power from corporate hands, when you don't depend on corporations to feed you and clothe you and shelter you, then you can also take back political power. You can get a little closer to sort of the democracy that was imagined by our founding fathers. And I think that alone might be worth an enormous amount of change, is to get back the right to a kind of self-determination that I think a lot of us really have lost.
I see sepia no more. Everything's blue and green and gold. It's amazing how perception changes as you cross state lines. A change of scenery can make a trivial thing of time. The driver doesn't know what he carries. My neighbor doesn't know what we've shared. Maybe I'll marry the first drifter I come across. Go get lost. Some
You know, what I'd like to say to Daniel is that, you know, his optimism, I hope it's, you know, it's catchy, because I'm really sick of people telling me that what I'm proposing is, you know, doom and gloom or anything like that, because, you know, my point is that life goes on no matter what. You just have to adjust. You have to get rid of some preconceived notions, maybe endure some hardship, but, you know, that builds character, in some people at least. It's not the end of the world.
Listen, mister, I'm in a hurry. Can we settle this pretty soon? Totally understand your worries. Need to take this train at noon. Many gloomy days were passing. Wanna leave this place right now. She touched my heart forever. Gotta save my soul somehow, 'cause it's a good, good life. It's a good, good life. Still a good, good life. I never meant to walk out. Sometimes you need to get out. I travel with no destination. I cleanse my mind from greed. The inner light is never changing. A charged heart needs some relief. These things make people weary. These things make people moan. I'm mostly secondary. Don't compromise your soul. It's a good, good life. It's a good, good life. It's still a good, good life. What took me so long to realize? Don't you dare to walk into my stride. Once I saw a chick wedding while the suns are down by the lake. Then was rocking steady. Evenings got late. I'm sure these skies are getting lucky. Everyone should find a home. She said I'm tired of this routine and gambled with my soul. But it's a good, good life. It's a good, good life. Still a good, good life. And if it takes a million miles, can wait the ocean hits my eye.
I guess that's it.